Please be seated. The Royal Commission on Antisemitism and Social Cohesion is now in session.
Yes, Ms Hammond.
Commissioner, the first witness this morning is Dr. Sara Meger. Her statement has the reference number STAT8999.0001.0614 and has an annexure, which is the 2026 research report, Misogyny, Online Radicalisation and Youth Extremism in Australia. I tender that statement.
Yes, very well. The statement and the accompanying expert report will be received as an exhibit. Now, Dr. Meger, will you take an oath or make an affirmation?
I'll make an affirmation.
Yes, just one moment.
Please stand for this section. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please say I do.
I do.
Yes, thank you. Do sit down. Yes, Ms Hammond.
Dr. Meger, you are a senior lecturer in international relations at the University of Melbourne in the School of Social and Political Sciences. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you tell the Commission briefly what your area of academic expertise is?
Yes, sure. My academic expertise is in the field of international relations, international security specifically, with research that focuses on the gendered drivers and effects of political violence, extremism, and radicalisation.
And Dr. Meger, you've conducted research in that space for a number of years, that's right. In 2024, together with some colleagues, you published a policy brief about misogyny, racism and violent extremism in Australia based on a survey of Australians, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And one of the findings of that research was that attitudes that were hostile and sexist or permissive of violence against women and racist attitudes were statistically significant predictors of support for violent extremism?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what led you to undertake that research and the key findings coming out of that, and then the further areas that you wish to explore as a result?
Sure, of course. So that study was motivated in part because in our field of international security, the attention on the drivers of extremism had largely been focused on external to Australia forms of extremism. And we had noted, from media reports and anecdotal evidence around Australia, rising rates of other forms of extremism that seem to be affecting the country. So what we wanted to do was apply some empirical research to what had to that point been largely anecdotal or qualitatively evidenced understanding of how what seems to be shared amongst different types of extremist groups are certain attitudes about a natural gender order and the need to, if by violence necessary, reestablish this natural gender order. And so what we sought to do was a national survey. That study was amongst Australian adults. It was weighted to correspond to ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, demographics for age, location, ethnicity, religion. And what we found was across the various types of extremist sentiments that were salient in the Australian context, which we identified as religious extremism, white supremacist extremism, economic reactionary, economic revolutionary, and incel extremism. Across all of these forms of extremism, hostile attitudes towards women and racist attitudes were very strong predictors of support for all forms of extremism.
And is it right that because that study was confined to adults, following that study you thought there was scope to conduct some further investigations in relation to a younger cohort?
There were two motivations for further research. Yes, we needed to understand the younger cohort better, because one of the things that we found in the first adult sample was that young people, the younger of the adults, were more likely to express support for the various forms of extremism. But also, following the first Bondi Junction attack, the Commonwealth government agencies noted that they had little resources to understand, I suppose, how gender attitudes might be motivating of mass violence. And so my second round of research was funded through a special round of funding earmarked specifically to understand the relationship of misogyny and youth radicalisation in Australia.
You've mentioned there was sort of an existing motivation to explore this area, and that's partially because of a body of evidence that indicated that there might be a relationship here, or some observational data that indicated there was something that merited some further explanation. Can you speak to the Commission a little bit about how it seems over recent years misogyny has been a significant factor in a number of incidents in Australia?
Yes, sure. So we're lucky, I suppose, compared to a lot of other Western countries, that we've got limited number of mass casualty attacks, but those that we have unfortunately seen in Australia, many have a history of domestic violence, of intervention orders, of hateful attitudes expressed towards women or former partners. And this is in line with anecdotal evidence from other Western countries as well. I believe it was the US Secret Service that found more than 2/3 of all mass casualty attacks since the 1980s in the US had a history of domestic violence, and many an expressly misogynistic motive. But we didn't have, I suppose, the robust evidence to demonstrate empirically that misogyny could predict then extremist orientations.
And Dr. Meger, when you talk about misogyny, you've highlighted a number of different things: a history of domestic violence, hateful attitudes towards women, permissive attitudes about violence towards women. Can you speak, I suppose, in a more summative way about how misogyny is conceptualised for the purposes of your research?
Yes, absolutely. So, excuse me. Given that from reading various sort of political texts or manifestos of different types of extremist groups, the idea of a traditional gender order, a rightful place for men and women in society, and particularly submissive roles for women seemed so central. We sought to operationalize misogyny as not only attitudes that are mistrusting of women and I guess sort of exemplifying this idea that they are somehow less human than men, but combine it also with attitudes permissive of violence against women that we conceptualize as being part of the same kind of ideological infrastructure of misogyny, that violence is a corrective mechanism that can be used when women transgress their proper gender role in society.
And I'll ask you a little bit more later on about the specific measures you use to try and quantitatively track and analyse those sorts of attitudes. Your most recent research also focused on youth, and you mentioned there were some particular motivations for focusing on youth. First, that they hadn't been able to be examined in the previous research, but also to the extent that data existed, it indicated there may be a particular predominance of certain attitudes among young people. Can you elaborate for the Commission a little bit about the particular need to examine the attitudes of young people as a distinct cohort in this space?
Yes, sure. So in December of last year, I was at an event where someone from the Department of Home Affairs intimated that currently more than 2/3 of their countering violent extremism caseload is taken up by young boys and men between the ages of 10 and 24 years old. They're massively overrepresented in our countering violent extremism efforts. And I think this is also replicated, or this sort of information is replicated in sociological research that has found young people more likely to hold more polarized political beliefs.
And can you briefly elaborate on what you mean by polarized political beliefs there?
So more extremely right-wing or more extremely left-wing beliefs.
So in your research report published earlier this year, you say the research was guided by a particular question, and the question you set out in the report is, to what degree is misogyny predictive of ideological extremism and support for violent extremism among Australian youth, and what are the social contexts generative of those ideologies among Australian youth? I'll ask you to speak a little bit about the framing of that question. The first part directed at the sort of predictive possibility about attitudes, but then you were also seeking to investigate social contexts generative of those ideologies. Can you speak a little bit about the motivation for that part of the research?
The questions were motivated recognizing this pattern that I believe our security agencies even talk about the increasingly mixed and unclear political ideologies of extremists. But what isn't mixed or unclear is how, in spite of drawing different ideological beliefs from different sort of political categories, what they seem to share is a pretty consistent idea about mistrust and hatred of women. And so on that basis, we sought to empirically test whether we could look at those hostile gender attitudes as predictive of support for a range of political ideologies. And the other aspect is, given that increasingly our security agencies are looking at the role of online influences on extremist attitudes, I wanted to better understand whether the more directly related mechanism was the online atmospheres or environments that people are exposed to, or if it's these gender attitudes.
So Dr. Meger, what I propose to do is sort of step you through some of these different parts of the research that you then conducted, which I understand was a mixed methods study that had this sort of quantitative component and some also qualitative components. So I understand the first part of the study involved seeking to conduct a survey of a significant cohort of both Australian adults and Australian youth. Could you explain the methodology for the survey part of the research briefly to the Commission?
Yes, sure. So the survey comprised 2 samples. We had a youth sample of 1,122 Australians aged 13 to 17. We deliberately oversampled the youth so that there was enough that we could make robust comparisons with the adult sample. And then the adult sample comprised 2,307 adults. They were asked identical questions, but they were recruited separately for ethical reasons. The youth were recruited through parent or guardians who were asked to give consent for the young person to answer the questions. We were very explicit that the questions were going to be quite politically charged and ask difficult questions about gender attitudes. And then the young people were also asked to give their assent to the research. The questionnaire was nearly 300 questions long. We asked a range of gender attitudes using a number of validated psychological scales. We drew from the Ann Rose National Survey on Attitudes to Violence Against Women. We asked questions about political attitudes. We asked people to place themselves on a political spectrum. We asked about religiosity, political religiosity, and we asked about online behaviours, as well as a range of mental health factors.
And in the indicators you used to develop questions that were designing to test gender attitudes, you've mentioned you used a range of different measures. And were those measures designed to target different sort of varieties of sexist or misogynistic attitudes? Is that a fair description?
Yes, but also they were largely duplicative, because we don't really know what are the best measures for getting at this problem. The misogyny scale that we used was only very recently developed and validated by some psychological researchers in the United Kingdom, who are also looking at this relationship between misogynistic attitudes and political violence. So we wanted, as part of the study, to sort of test amongst the numerous variables of gender attitudes which might be most closely related to extremist attitudes.
Thinking first about what the results of this survey showed, just about the prevalence of some of these hostile gender attitudes, misogynistic attitudes among the various cohorts who were sampled. Can you summarise for the Commission what that research revealed about the spread of those sorts of attitudes among the different samples that were taken, the youth, adults, male and female?
Absolutely. So in general, I would say that the more hostile sexist attitudes, represented by the misogyny scale or the adolescent dating violence scale, or traditional violence against women scale, these tended to concentrate more in the younger cohorts. So in the analysis, I had disaggregated by generation and also by age sort of categories to break down further to distinguish whether the teenage Gen Z is significantly different from the adult Gen Z. So we did see a concentration in some of the more, what we might call, harrowing, harmful gender attitudes amongst the younger cohorts. More so the males than females, but teenage girls were also quite likely, or surprisingly likely, to agree with some of these harmful attitudes. But then others were pretty static across the age cohort. So disbelieving women's reports of violence was pretty consistent across generations and more concentrated in male respondents than female respondents. As well as minimizing the harm of violence against women. That was fairly consistent across cohorts.
Now, the second significant category of attitudes that your research sought to examine was the prevalence of various extremist attitudes among the cohort you were surveying. Can you speak briefly to how, using a sort of survey research method, you try and identify people who hold extremist attitudes of various kinds?
Again, we wanted to be really robust with this survey, and so we included some of the measures that have been used in previous psychological studies of radicalisation. These are called the radicalism intent scale, violent intention scale, and radical violent sympathy scale. But we'd also, in the earlier 2024 report, my colleague Melissa Johnson and I, we had developed our own measures of specific ideological extremist attitudes that we developed by drawing on extremist statements, manifestos of recognized extremist groups in order to try and capture the actual political ideology and rates of agreement with the idea of the legitimacy of using violence in support of that political ideology.
And as you did before, speaking about what the survey showed about responses to various gender attitude questions, can you summarise for the Commission the results of the survey across sort of different demographics in terms of the results on people, the extent to which people held extremist attitudes?
What's similar with the gender attitudes is we again have a concentration of a higher likelihood of expressing agreement with extremist sentiments amongst our younger cohorts. The Gen Z cohort was the most likely to express agreement with various forms of extremism. I've included in my report on page 18 a table summarizing rates of agreement by generation. And you can see that amongst Gen Z males, the rates of agreement range from 14 to about 25%. And then it tapers as the generations get older. And similar with our gender attitudes, there's a higher concentration of agreement amongst male respondents than female respondents.
One of the things you note in your report is that there's sometimes discourse in Australian society that seeks to attribute problematic gender and extremist attitudes to demographic factors such as ethnicity and religion. And I understand your research did do some work investigating whether those lay perceptions were well-founded in light of the data you'd collected. Can you speak a little bit to the Commission about the work you did attempting to further disaggregate your data by reference to those characteristics?
Yes, absolutely. So when looking at just frequencies, it tells us a little bit of the story of likelihood, I guess, of somebody of a certain demographic expressing agreement with attitudes. But the challenge with our survey is that the respondent rates for we relied on individuals self-identifying their ethnicity and their religion, and some of the sample sizes are too small to be statistically significant. But when put into a regression model to see what elements were actually most driving or most explaining variance in rates of support for the different forms of extremism, what it showed was that the gender attitudes by far outweighed and were doing the explanatory work of what caused someone to be more or less likely to support the various forms of extremist sentiments.
And it follows from that by comparison, ethnicity and religion did not, in your analysis, have significant explanatory power. Is that fair?
That's right.
So you've mentioned that one of the motivations of this research was to explore whether misogynistic attitudes or gender hostile attitudes were predictive of extremist attitudes. You've explained how you've gathered a significant body of survey data on the prevalence of both the gender attitudes and the extremist attitudes. Can you explain to the Commission, for a non-academic, a non-statistical audience, how one uses data of that kind to draw conclusions about certain attitudes being predictive of others in that way?
Sure, yes. So there's a number of ways that we analyze the data. The most simplistic is to look at how much the responses correlate to each other. So if someone is saying they agree with harmful gender attitudes, the whole range of sort of misogynistic attitudes, did that make them more likely to also agree with the extremist attitudes? And doing that sort of correlation analysis, we found very strong support that these gender attitudes significantly correlate with extremist attitudes. We're talking, around 50 to 60% correlation, which is quite high for attitude variables like this. But more sophisticated, we then put the variables into what's called a regression analysis to try and understand, if you control for some of these, what then is the residual effect of the gender attitudes on extremism. And by doing a regression analysis, what it showed us was that beyond any of the other attitudes that we measured or behaviors that we measured, the gender attitudes are accounting for the majority of variance in how someone responded to the violent extremist attitudes.
Yeah. So you've said that one of the key findings of your research is that misogyny is a robust, cross-cutting predictor of violent extremism. Can you speak to the Commission a little bit about what that finding sort of means, and and perhaps elaborate a little bit on how that was emerging from the various survey responses you'd seen?
So again, if we think about how our national strategy, A Safer Australia, talks about the mixed, unclear ideologies, what this finding shows us is that more so than how someone places themselves on a political spectrum, more so than their religiosity, their ethnicity, what online things they engage with, the attitude, the one thing we measured that was most likely to be able to predict if someone supported any of the forms of violent extremism we measured was their attitudes about violence, the permissibility of violence against women, and how those attitudes sort of formed a constellation with these more hostile gender attitudes. In one of the analyses that I've done for academic publication of these results, it's called a relative weights analysis. So noting that a lot of these things overlap with each other, it allows us to single out the independent effect of each item. And it finds that if you combine the hostile gender attitudes with only the gendered online behaviors, now these I call manfluencer engagement, online dating, and online pornography, these factors together accounted for between 90 and 97% of all the explained variance in how someone responds to the violent extremism measures.
Thank you, Dr. Meger, and I'll ask you a little bit more about the part of the research that focused on different online environments in a moment.
Yes.
But staying, thinking about as being a predictor of extremist attitudes point, you've explained to the Commission that you explored a range of different varieties of extremism, so religious extremism, white supremacist, economic reactionary, left-wing, incel, and anti-feminist violent extremism. One of the observations you make in the report is that it might be thought that some of those varieties of online extremism would show a closer relationship with certain gender attitudes than others. And while there were some differences, you seem to be saying overall the outcome is actually across the violent extremist ideologies, you see this predictive behaviour. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what your research showed about any distinctions between different violent extremist attitudes and the commonalities that existed.
We were, in the first round of research, quite surprised to see that the misogynistic attitudes also predicted support for left-wing extremism. That seemed sort of counterintuitive to us, based just on political ideologies. But I think it does speak to the element of how people are radicalizing and drawing from different political sources to make up this sort of worldview. And so from that lens, it's unsurprising, I suppose, that across the board, while there are some variations, the hostile gender attitudes correlate with all forms of extremism to a level of statistical significance and having at least moderate influence, in some cases more than moderate influences. So the correlation table that I include on page 22 of the report, it has a heat map that shows how the attitudes are perhaps slightly stronger in some of the correlations with some of the forms of extremism, but anything really above 0.2 is considered a significant effect in social research.
Thank you.
Can I just take you back briefly to the chart on page 18 of your report, where you record in relation to left-wing violent extremist attitudes, Gen Z males at a rate of 24.2% exhibited those attitudes. And then if you go to the previous page, the way you've tested for a left-wing violent extremist attitude were the questions: the rich will not give up their wealth easily, organised violence, including against people, is the only way to make things fair for everyone, and secondly, capitalism is ruining the world and should be resisted with violence. So I take it that out of the cohort of Gen Z males, 24.2% agreed with those questions.
Yes.
And that was just slightly higher, and I accept no doubt within the margin of error, than the right-wing violent extremist attitudes of Gen Z males.
And perhaps more surprising was the degree or the number of people that expressed agreement with both. The overlap was surprising to us.
Dr. Meger, you've mentioned that another aspect of this research was to explore various online influences on misogyny and extremism in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated your decision to explore how people's activities online may be influencing their attitudes in this space?
There's been a lot of research in the field of terrorism studies and extremism and radicalisation around the influence of social media, certain types of online content, online gaming, and discussion forums perhaps being a cause of radicalisation. And so we wanted to include questions asking people to self-report their levels of engagement with these different types of online environments to see whether these were having the effect on extremist attitudes that have been talked about in both the scholarship and also in a lot of our policy statements we've seen over the last 5 years. And also whether there was a degree of difference in what the content on these platforms was that might be relating to extremist sentiments.
And your research asked people about their engagement with online gaming, online forums, online dating, pornography, a range of things. You've mentioned that one of the things was engagement with the manosphere or manfluencer or femfluencer content. Can you explain for the Commission how you understood those concepts for the purposes of your research?
We asked respondents whether we asked the male respondents about engagement with manfluencers and female respondents with femfluencers. And we phrased it as content. For the manfluencer content, it was online content that is focused on themes of masculinity, fitness, self-improvement, trying to typify, I guess, what we sort of homogenize under this umbrella term manosphere. A lot of it has explicitly anti-feminist themes, but not all of it. And so we also supplemented with a second question after they answered degree of engagement. To what extent did they see these influences as positive, negative, or neutral on feminism?
So, having gathered a body of data about your survey respondents' engagement with these different online environments, can you describe what your research showed about the relationship between online influences and first various gender attitudes?
So, again, starting with the most simplistic form of analysis, the correlations, we did find significant moderate effects to pretty more than strong effects on online environments, on misogynistic attitudes, and particularly attitudes permissive of violence against women. But these were not necessarily in the places that the literature had anticipated. So those online environments that showed the strongest relationship with harmful gender attitudes were manfluencers, online dating, and pornography. What surprised us was social media showed null association, and perhaps even in some cases a negative relationship with these harmful attitudes, suggesting that general social media use could actually be protective against these harmful attitudes if you could control for the gendered content on the platforms.
Can you explain how you established that social media did not have that harmful effect?
When we asked people, we asked them, to how often do you engage with these different forms? Social media was a separate question to manfluencers or femfluencers or online gaming or online forums. And when put into a regression model where you could control for the other influences, the manfluencer or femfluencer, then whatever's left over of just social media that doesn't have that gender content.
And Dr. Meger, you've described one of the key findings of your research as being that, before I ask that, can you then summarise the results of the survey about these various online influences and extremist attitudes, as opposed to the gender attitudes?
Yes. So similarly, with the simple correlation analysis, we also found quite strong, significant relationships between a number of the online influences and extremist attitudes. But again, surprisingly more concentrated in this gendered content. So across the forms of extremism, the table for this is on page 31 of the report. Across the extremist outcomes, manfluencer engagement, online dating, and online pornography most strongly correlated with all forms of extremist outcomes. And again, social media generally showed quite weak associations. But then, as I alluded to earlier, when put into a full regression analysis, which is outlined in chapter 5 of the report, starting on page 43. This is then saying, okay, if we take the gender variables and the demographic, or like the political religiosity, and then the online variables all together, what's having the most influence? And you can see that most of those online influences drop to non-significance, or maybe even have slightly negative relationships. The only ones that retain residual effect are those gendered online influences: pornography, online dating, and man-influencer engagement. But more so than that, the much stronger relationship are the hostile gender attitudes. Now, it wasn't included in this report, but another form of analysis that I've done on this data is called structural equation modeling, which shows the pathway of the relationships between these three factors. And what it shows is that entirely the influence of the online behaviors is explained through the gender attitudes that they cultivate. The only one that retains an independent, direct relationship with extremism is pornography use.
And look, Meger, you've summarised this part of your research by saying it shows that online environments amplify but do not alone create extremist orientations. Is there anything else you'd like to speak to about that finding from the research?
What it suggests to me is that the online attitudes that people are cultivating that might be leading them into an extremist pipeline start with the gendered attitudes. That the grievance narrative that becomes generative of a political ideology begins out of a basis of how one's feelings of being a man or woman in society is based on a sense of unfairness about the gender order and a need to reconstitute something, some imagined utopic past. And therefore, when we try to mitigate whatever harmful content people are exposed to online that might be leading to this rising rate of youth radicalisation, we can't be ignoring the gendered content, that it's not just being exposed to political ideas online, but actually the gendered ideas that are being cultivated are doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Dr. Meger, I wanted to ask you some questions about another component of this research, which was a more qualitative examination. My understanding is that part of this qualitative analysis actually involved an extension to the research as you originally conceived it, as a result of what happened when you published your preliminary findings. Can you explain that to the Commission?
Yes, so as I was writing up some of the preliminary analyses, a reporter had been tipped off to this survey from the Herald Sun, and I spoke to them at length, and they published an article just reporting the findings. And the online comments in response to the Herald Sun article were so overwhelmingly misogynistic and negative that I sought an amendment to my ethics application so that I could include a qualitative analysis of these comments as evidence of the problem that the research is seeking to address. What it found was, so I looked at the comments across 3 different platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Triple J's The Hack also did a small report, so the Instagram posts were from their posting of the content. And overwhelmingly, the message of the commenters was extremely hostile towards the study, the findings, and the most common comment made was that, excuse me, that the frequency of young men expressing misogynistic attitudes was too low. most common sentiment was, those are rookie numbers, we got to pump those numbers up.
Are there other particular themes that emerged from your analysis of those online comments?
Other themes that emerged, there was a great deal of belief that any of the misogynistic attitudes must be an external influence, an import of other cultures into Australia rather than an endogenous feature of Australian social and political life. And a belief that the research must be biased if it's about women and gender.
Dr. Meger, the other source of qualitative data that you made use of in this research came from a group of Australian teachers. Can you explain what motivated your research to specifically seek out qualitative data from teachers in schools?
So when I was designing this study, I wanted to be able to get at some actual more qualitative information about how these behaviours or attitudes might be manifesting amongst young people. And I felt that teachers could give us good insight as being sort of at the coalface of how young people are navigating their social and political lives. So I supplemented the first survey with a second, more qualitative survey of 511 Australian teachers from around the country, and asked them questions about both misogynistic attitudes that they might have seen expressed by students and extremist attitudes. And I did make these very distinct questions in the survey, but most of the respondents tended to conflate misogynistic attitudes with extremist attitudes, which was also a surprising finding.
Can you summarise for the Commission perhaps a flavour of the examples of student extremist behaviour that were emerging from this qualitative data from Australian teachers?
So teachers were asked some quantitative questions as well as qualitative. They were asked about frequency of seeing certain types of political sentiments expressed, and the frequencies weren't included in the report, but I recall that it was roughly 25% said that they had experienced sentiments from students that violence to resist government authority was legitimate. In the qualitative responses, teachers frequently noted very hostile misogynistic attitudes expressed by students. They independently referenced Andrew Tate as an influence and the manosphere, even though they were not prompted to talk about the manosphere. So this is indicating how culturally salient these influences have become. But they also noted a degree of racism and celebration of overseas political violence being expressed by students, as well as some examples of students drawing swastikas on notebooks or around campus. General, sort of safety concerns. They were not frequent, but enough teachers said that they had seen worrying behaviours and attitudes.
And in terms of the celebration of overseas political violence, did the teachers refer to particular overseas events?
A few did. On page 37 of the report, I give some examples of the actual quotes from teachers. So on theme 1.2 on page 37, students talked a little bit about Nazi symbolism, or openly saying they hate Jews and to free Palestine.
And Dr. Meger, I wanted to ask you in particular about, you say in the report that teachers reported instances of anti-Semitism alongside anti-Islamic, anti-immigration sentiment, and sometimes explicit expressions of white supremacist ideology. Can you expand a little bit for the Commission on particularly what your research showed about anti-Semitism and white supremacist and other extremist ideologies in this Australian schools context?
Now, unfortunately, at the time that this study was designed, anti-Semitism didn't seem as politically salient. This research was designed in the wake of the Bondi Junction stabbing, and so the primary motivation was looking at gender attitudes. But I think the independent, like the voluntary information provided by some of the teachers indicates to us that this political polarization is having very real world impact on social cohesion at ages perhaps even younger than we had anticipated. We had teachers of students as young as year 5 and 6 expressing concern for some of these hateful attitudes expressed by students.
And just looking at your report at page 37, when you look at the examples that teachers gave and that you set out in that report, the second one is a reference to Nazi symbolism and ideology. The third, group of boys in year 10 making rape jokes and stating they wish that Hitler was still alive and had completed the job. The fourth, a Muslim student expressing the opinion that those of Jewish descent deserved acts of terrorism. The fifth, Islamic students exhibiting anti-Semitism about Jews and about non-Muslim people in general. And the final, students openly saying that they hate Jews and to free Palestine. So that was the sort of burden of the impression you got from the qualitative study of teachers.
Yes.
Dr. Meger, another theme in your report from this part of the work was particularly around the experiences of female teachers. Could you speak briefly to the Commissioner about that?
Both female and male teacher respondents, they were quite consistent in saying that the students were more hostile towards female teachers, that they were seeing how some of these hostile gender attitudes were manifesting in rejection of female teachers' authority, open defiance, and sometimes actual hostile behavior towards female teachers. And of course, the female teachers were more likely to report having witnessed or experienced these sorts of behaviors, but both male and female teachers were saying that they saw it as an increasing issue and on the rise rather than just something that's been consistent over decades.
Yes. And finally, in relation to this part of the research, one of the other issues explored in your collection of data from the teachers was the role of social media as an influence on youth attitudes and behaviour. Can you speak to the results of this piece of the work in that space or in response to that issue?
So as I said, the questions that we asked the teachers did not name the manosphere directly, but named online misogyny, and the teachers independently spoke about Andrew Tate and the manosphere as having a significant influence on these attitudes. And I think, as qualitative research on the manosphere has shown, there's a lot of slippage between the misogyny and racist or white supremacist attitudes that become expressed, and I think that's also helping us understand the conflation in the teacher responses when asked about extremist attitudes, that they kept bringing up the misogyny as a key element in these extremist attitudes that they were seeing coming from, or they were independently saying, coming from these specific online influences of the manosphere.
Dr. Meger, your report concludes by expressing what can be drawn from this research and then thinking about some recommendations that might flow from it. I want to ask you some questions about that. One of the things you say on page 45 of your report as a conclusion of your research is that misogyny is not only a social issue but a national security issue in Australia. Your research has led you to that conclusion. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
So currently, our national security framework, while it recognizes misogynistic extremism as one form of ideological extremism, it seems to me in my reading of the strategy that they assume this means, I guess, like incel extremism. So recognizing that misogyny might play a role in a form of extremism. But we don't have any apparent mechanisms for operationalizing an understanding of how these harmful gender attitudes can be motivating a range of extremist ideologies. And so, in my mind, what this research suggests is that if we could more fully integrate an awareness and perhaps risk assessment of how these gender attitudes could be motivating a range of political ideologies, we might be better placed for effective early intervention strategies.
You also make some recommendations about interagency cooperation to address misogyny, violence against women and extremism, rather than viewing them as isolated phenomena. Can you speak to that recommendation and explain what that would look like?
Certainly. So I think Australia has one of the world's most advanced policy architectures for addressing violence against women. Our national plan is extremely robust. At the state and Commonwealth level, we have a number of very sophisticated agencies and programs working at addressing violence against women and some misogynistic attitudes, but they're currently seen as social issues and mostly about individual interpersonal relationships rather than looking at it as a problem of national social cohesion. And so I think rather than reinventing the wheel within our national security infrastructure, if there was more collaboration across these policy architectures, it could probably lead to better intervention in the national security space as well.
One of the things this commission has heard is that in the countering violent extremism space, one of the things that can be done is primary prevention programs, meaning programs that are directed very broadly at the general population rather than at individuals identified as being specifically vulnerable or at specific risk. Your research has also led you to some recommendations about forms of primary prevention that might be effective. Can you explain what your recommendation in that regard is?
Given that we've got extremist attitudes showing up in, from this information from Home Affairs in children as young as 10 years old, but then my teacher surveys showing that these misogynistic attitudes similarly starting as young as 6-7 years old, what it suggests to me is that by investing in primary prevention around gender attitudes from an earlier age than perhaps mandated in some of our jurisdictions, the recommendation I make is mandating respectful relationships education, which has been found to be extremely effective in reducing misogynistic attitudes. Mandating this and starting it from foundation year level might actually prove effective as national security and countering violent extremism primary prevention, as well as addressing the gender attitudes.
And Dr. Meger, finally, could you speak to the fifth and last recommendation in your report, which is really focused on some potential steps that can be taken in relation to online platforms?
Yes, so I think the key takeaway from the relationships we found with the online influences is that our focus may be somewhat misplaced in thinking that it's extremist content rather than harmful gender content that is driving these hateful attitudes. And therefore, my recommendation is that if we want to very seriously address or redress the causes of social disunity, lack of cohesion, hateful attitudes, we need to be intervening at the level of content and regulating what content people are exposed to. So for me, the social media ban is a step. It's a blunt instrument, but not quite getting at the key issue, which is the gendered content that people are exposed to online that is most directly related to the attitudes that we're seeking to prevent.
And my understanding of your recommendation is not so much a ban or preventing people from seeking out certain information, but is perhaps focused on the algorithm and what platforms feed to people. Is that right?
We know from studies done overseas that algorithmic amplification of hostile gender attitudes as well as extremist content, it's more engaging, it gets more clicks. We don't know, because it's proprietary information, how the algorithms actually work, but one study done found that 30% of YouTube Shorts content was explicitly misogynistic. And so it takes very little time for somebody to be online to start being fed based on the demographic information in their profile, misogynistic content that my research shows can lead to extremist orientations. Now, one way that this could be addressed is through some sort of regulation of that algorithmic feeding of content to people. But another recommendation I do make is around content regulation, particularly for our more vulnerable sectors of society, youth.
Commissioner, I have no further questions for Dr. Meger.
Yes, thank you. Just before I let you go, Dr. Meger, taking you back to that graph on page 18, am I right in understanding that in terms of attitudes sympathetic to violent intentions, boomer females recorded a 0 result? Yes. Thank you, and you are excused.
Thank you very much.
I note the time. I think we might have an early morning tea.
Commissioner, I now call the witness who will be known as ADY.
Yes.
And I understand their image will not be shown on the live stream, and of course there's non-publication orders in place in terms of their identifying information.
Yes, that's noted. Will you take an oath?
Oath, Commissioner.
Yes, very well.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please say I do.
I do.
Yes. Thank you.
You've prepared a statement for the Commission dated 29 July 2026.
Yes, ma'am.
And is that statement still true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
I tender that statement, Commissioner, which is stat.899.001.06. No, I'm sorry, it's stat.899.001.0610_R.
Yes. Yes, the statement will be received as an exhibit.
And there's one annexure to that statement that I will tender as well, NSW_PF.001.003.0513.
Yes, that will be separately received as an exhibit.
You are currently the commander of the Anti-Terrorism and Intelligence Group.
Yes, ma'am.
And in that role, you're responsible for the Terrorism Security Intelligence Unit, the High Risk Terrorist Offenders Unit, and the Engagement and Hate Crimes Unit.
That's correct.
And you've been in that role of commander since August 2024.
That's correct.
And could I ask you a few questions, first of all, about the Engagement and Hate Crime Unit? Could I start by asking you to explain what the role of that unit is?
The primary role of the Engagement and Hate Crime Unit is community engagement. We also do interventions. We do hate crime analysis. We look to get expert advice when we need to support investigations in the field. And we also look at the training and raising awareness around hate crime through New South Wales Police and community.
And of course, that unit is not responsible for investigating hate crimes itself.
That's correct. We're more a support role in terms of across New South Wales Police.
And how do you provide that support to other parts of New South Wales Police?
I think the primary area is the awareness that we raise around hate crime, the legislation that we have within New South Wales and the Commonwealth, and we provide that training from our new recruits, our detectives, our unsolved homicide teams, right up to our running a hate crime forum in June this year, where we're trying to push as much knowledge as we can out to the field around hate crime.
And you mentioned, when describing the role of the unit, interventions. What do you mean by interventions?
So interventions is the our support that we provide into the engagement and support program, which is administered by Department of Communities and Justice. And I have two officers that work within that program, that broader program within the ESP with DCJ.
And in terms of, you also mentioned community engagements. I'll ask you about that topic in a little more detail later. But can I ask this question? You've identified in your statement that the unit has a role in engaging with communities in New South Wales, including those affected by politically motivated violence, community unrest, hate crimes, or communities at risk of radicalisation. Can you explain how the unit goes about identifying communities that might be at risk of radicalisation?
In terms of radicalisation, we would look at some of the geopolitical events that are occurring, and that may trigger us to have a look at a particular community that might be impacted. It's a difficult question because it's so broad, and I wouldn't say that we look at any particular community as a focus. It's broader than that. We have to look at some of the things that are occurring at that particular point in time, and we will work with those communities and the community leaders to ensure that we can give them the support And I think from our perspective is understanding, is pushing it out to understand around what hate crime actually has and the impact that it has on community.
Right. And when you refer to geopolitical events, are you referring, for example, to conflicts overseas?
Yes, they certainly, what we do definitely see within the Engagement and Hate Crime Commissioner is when those geopolitical events occur, we certainly see a spike in hate crime in particular towards different communities.
You've also mentioned that the unit engages with communities by strengthening relationships with community representatives, religious leaders, key organisations and support groups. Why do you consider it important that the unit engages with religious leaders in particular?
It's critically important to engage with all the leaders within community, particularly religious leaders. What we find is that when those events that occur overseas that may have an impact locally, we can go straight to those community leaders and have those trusted conversations around what impact those particular events are going to have locally. And we have difficult conversations sometimes with community leaders around that, but I think from our perspective it's that single source of truth to understand what impact that will have on particularly social cohesion locally.
And when you engage with religious leaders in that way, does that involve you passing on information to them as well as getting information in return from those leaders that might inform your engagement strategies?
Correct, yes.
And I take it you work together with those religious leaders because of the position of influence that they may have in their community?
Absolutely.
And in those circumstances, say for example in the context of an international conflict and your engagement with a religious leader, what sort of influence are you hoping that they might be able to exert over their community in those sorts of scenarios?
I think the first step for us is that we can test the temperature within that particular community, how much heat there might be within that community around that particular issue. That's probably the first part. But we know that they have quite significant influence over community, so we can get a message out from a policing perspective if we need to. And certainly in the time that I've been in this role, there's been a number of occasions where we've actually had to do that and push that message out so the community can understand, even things like around what hate crime laws are. So we can push that out to community so they understand that.
I might come to a couple of examples of that I think you've included in your statement shortly. But before I get to those details, at paragraph 18 of your statement, you noted that one aspect of the unit's role is to monitor and review hate crime related incidents. And you've noted that the unit records hate crime related events in a spreadsheet, is that right?
Correct.
And that enables them to be categorised as religion or faith based?
Yeah, or some of the other protected factors as well.
Yes. And within that category of religion or faith, you can subcategorise as what you've described as Judaism, Christianity or Islam, for example?
Correct.
And as you've noted, some of those incidents don't rise to the level of criminal charge, and some do.
That's
right?
correct.
But you keep records of the incidents that don't rise to the level of a criminal charge, is that right?
That's critically important because what it does is it gives us an idea of what's occurring in the community. May not be a criminal offence, but if we've got, for example, racial abuse that's occurring in a particular area of New South Wales, it gives us an idea of what potentially is occurring in that community. So that's really critically important to us to actually analyse that intelligence, because the trends then inform our engagement. So we need to then look at those trends, and then informs our engagement to go out and actually work in that community or with local police or with other stakeholders in that particular area.
And can you give an example of how it might inform your engagement with a particular community, that sort of data?
So if I look at some examples that I provided in my statement, I think there's a time where in 2024 where I attended Corowa in relation to a particular neo-Nazi group that marched into town on a Saturday afternoon. It was critically important for myself and my team to get down there because we needed to provide information to the community around what the risk is posed by those types of individuals that are walking into a small regional country town on a Saturday afternoon, giving a 7-minute speech outside the War Memorial. It was critically important to make sure that the community understood what the risk of that particular group was in terms of infiltrating their local community. So that's probably one example that I can give as to how we might use that data. But at the same time, I think we push out a lot of intelligence out of the engagement and hate crime team, in particular to local police area commands, where we can see a trend where a particular community is being targeted.
That example of the neo-Nazi rally you've referred to at paragraph 34A of your statement. What sort of activities did the unit engage in on that occasion in order to address the impacts of a protest of that kind?
Yeah, so we engaged the local civic leaders, the council, business leaders, community representatives, business representatives, and Commissioner, we gave them a full briefing on what the impact was of these particular types of hate groups, so they fully understood exactly what impact they may have on the community, and in particular giving them an understanding of how they might try and infiltrate a community, particularly young people. So it was critically important to get that information out quickly, and then obviously beyond that we then also delivered some training to the local police district officers to give them an appreciation of the impact of this particular group and hate crime more generally.
And when you say in that paragraph that the unit delivered a hate crime awareness presentation, was that to the police that you mentioned, or was that to a broader group?
Both. We did it to both the police and to the community.
And when you say the community, do you just mean the leaders that you identify here, or was it a broader group than that?
No, that was the leaders.
I see.
Yep.
And what was the feedback that you received on those presentations?
Very positive. I think we responded to that very quickly in terms of that occurring. It was quite a shock for that small regional community to have that happen in their town. You know, from my impressions of looking at that community, they were very strong against any type of racism, and that gave me great comfort in terms of how that community operates. And I think the one thing that showed me that the 7-minute video has a whole lot of people shouting things at this particular group as they're giving their 7-minute speech, but the local kids, as they marched off down the road, started using their bikes to flick rocks up at them. So they certainly weren't intimidated by them, but they wanted them out of their town very quickly. But they certainly pose a significant risk of infiltrating a town.
And is that the unit's practice, that when protests of that more extremist kind occur, to do that sort of outreach activity
Yes.
in the days after?
Yes.
I see. And do you see regional towns as being particularly important to address in that respect, or is it important across the board?
No, absolutely. Regional, metro, wherever these particular hate crimes or hate groups might pop their head up, we will certainly make sure that we work with those communities and the police in those areas.
I see. You've noted at paragraph 33 of your statement that since January 2024, the Engagement and Hate Crimes Unit has undertaken 1,155 community engagements. Does that include the sort of engagement that you just referred to in Cowra?
Yes, it does, ma'am.
And what other kinds of community engagements are you referring to there?
We may go out and speak with community religious leaders on a daily basis. We're quite strategic as to the way that we do those engagements, but Commissioner, it's about building the trust with community. If we have that trust with community, then we know that when we have to ask them a hard question, that we're going to get the response back that's honest, and then we use that as that single source of truth around social cohesion and how then we might have to deal with that within that particular community.
And you've referred to one aim of those engagements as being to enhance community resilience. What do you mean by community resilience in this context?
It's, you know, with the number of geopolitical issues that have occurred, particularly over the last number of years, it's really important for us to understand what impact those events are having locally. And then if we can talk to the leaders around what impact that's having, then we can provide the support that we need into that community from an engagement perspective to try and build that resilience. Because there's lots of events that occur around the world that do have impact on people that live here locally. So for us, it's around having that conversation, delivering, we may deliver some community awareness programs also to build that resilience. But it's on a case-by-case basis depending on that particular community.
And when you say community awareness programs, are they programs that focus on what is hate speech, what are prohibited symbols of the kind you mentioned earlier, or are they kind of different broader community awareness programs that you undertake as well?
No, they're probably in terms of delivering around legislation, getting people that the awareness around what a hate crime is, what a hate incident is, and encouraging the reporting of those incidents. That's critically important to us. It's certainly a crime that's well underreported, and it's an area that we have worked really hard on with community to try and make sure there is more reporting.
And do the community engagements also include, for example, going out to schools to deliver those sorts of presentations as well?
Correct, yeah. And look, one area that we focus quite heavily on is the working with the Department of Education and particularly the principals forums, where you have a cross-section of the education leadership, and that's important for us because we can then promote the work of our unit, but at the same time we also promote things like the Step Together hotline for that's available, so it gives us an opportunity to promote the work that we do within the ESP program and also the Step Together helpline.
And for context, the Step Together helpline is a hotline people can call if they have concerns about someone they know being at risk of extremist behaviour or radicalisation.
Correct. Yeah, it's a really important hotline. If I look at from the experience that I have, Commissioner, within the role, we want to give parents, carers the opportunity to ring a hotline first before they have to ring the national security hotline, because it's a big step, particularly for a parent or someone to go down that road of having to ring the national security hotline. We want them, that early intervention is critically important, and the earlier we get to the Step Together advice to the parent, then the earlier we can start engaging with that particular person.
And am I right in thinking the Step Together hotline is something that it's a Commonwealth initiative but operated by New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice at the moment?
Correct.
But has the police had some role in the establishment or the rollout of that hotline in an advisory capacity?
We have had some input previously when it was being developed. I think the key for us is the continual promotion opportunities that we get, particularly when we're in front of community, to push that hotline out so the community know that it's available.
And are you aware of incidents, and I'm not asking you to give particular examples or identify particular individuals, but are you aware of incidents from your work where people have taken up use of that Step Together hotline?
Absolutely, and it's turned out to be very positive because it gives a soft entry point into that early intervention.
And indeed, one aspect of the unit's work you refer to, and one purpose of the community engagement you've identified, is strengthening pathways for early intervention and support. How does that play out? How does the engagement result in the strengthening of those pathways?
I think firstly because we have the opportunity to be in front of many different community groups, and that allows us to promote various programs like the Step Together. We can talk about engagement support, and then obviously as a policing organisation, we have access to our youth command and youth officers across various police districts and police commands, and we can also promote the work of the youth action meetings that occur right across New South Wales, and work closely, particularly when we've identified an individual that we need to do some work with within that ESP program. We can start to then work with the police district and the police command as to making sure that there's resources that are put in to work with that particular individual.
You've given one example of community engagement at Curra earlier. Another example you give is at paragraph 35, which followed the death of the Hezbollah leader in 2024, which was around the time of the first anniversary of the October 7 attacks. Could you just describe the actions taken by the unit on that occasion and why they were considered to be important steps to take?
Yeah, so Commissioner, we went on did some work around educating the community, particularly around the fact that Hezbollah were a prescribed terrorist organisation, and flying a symbol or a flag or anything of that nature would have amounted to a criminal offence. We know in the community that there was a lot of support for that particular individual, and we were concerned that we may have large numbers of individuals start flying that particular symbol, which was prohibited. So what we went about was educating the community around the fact that this was a prohibited symbol, and they would be committing an offence. We went as far as putting a message in Arabic on the day of the protest, so that could be pushed out to the those that were at the protest activity, to be able to push that message out so they understood that it was.
And you had dealings, did you, with the senior leadership within the Shia religion?
Correct, and that partly, Commissioner, probably guided us in making, because we could see that there was a complete misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of the legislation. So we worked with the leadership to then push out that message.
And were the leadership cooperative with you?
Absolutely.
Can I then ask you some questions about the topic of online radicalisation, which you address from paragraph 39 of your statement? You've observed there that it's widely recognised that the online space has become a strong amplifying factor in the distribution and propagation of hate material. Could you elaborate on what you mean by amplifying factor in that context?
The fact that we've got various platforms that allow individuals to connect with other individuals and spread hate. They could be sharing violent extremist videos. They could be building a manifesto on a particular platform. All of these things culminate in individuals being attracted potentially to a particular group, online group, or sharing those particular images or videos. That's that first step of people entering into that pathway of radicalisation. And the platforms that are out there, there's that opportunity for individuals to join those particular platforms and those groups within. So that's what I mean by the amplification, where previously, prior to the internet and that being pushed out, well, people would not have been able to share that material, particularly as widely as they can now, globally, right across the world.
And you've explained in your statement why the unit is not in a position to provide a detailed analysis of the extent to which anti-Semitism or extremism is driven by online radicalisation, because that would involve an extensive review of all the incidents and probably the need for additional expertise to draw those kind of broad conclusions. But you have said at paragraph 41 that the unit has observed that online activities are likely to be playing a significant role in increases in hate incidents. How have you come to form that conclusion?
Yeah, so since 2024, we started tracking, in August 24, we started tracking the online hate incidents, and what we've found is that overall about 20% year on year have been online hate incidents that we've seen. And we're continually tracking that moving forward also.
You've noted that the online environment is increasingly the forum in which hate incidents occur, which is reflected in the statistic you just gave, but you also say that it plays a role in the development of anti-Semitism or extreme beliefs. How does that manifest, that role in developing those types of beliefs?
The fact that people can push their views out on various platforms with little moderation of some of those platforms adds to the fact that individuals could certainly develop some of those ideologies. So it's certainly something that we monitor closely within the Engagement and Hate Crime and also my Terrorism Security Intelligence Unit.
We've heard some evidence in an earlier hearing block about the police's interactions with the e-safety commissioner on some of this online material. Can you speak to what extent your unit or other parts of the police interact with social media platforms directly, and whether they provide any information to you to assist with your investigations?
There are occasions where the social media platforms will engage with law enforcement. I think for me, Commissioner, the gap here is we have to ask for the information. There would certainly be an opportunity for platforms to be proactive in providing information, intelligence to law enforcement, particularly when you've got individuals that are talking about potential attack planning, building manifestos online. Those pieces of information would be critically important for law enforcement to be able to at least disrupt and or it may be an early intervention point as well.
again, I'm not asking you for specific examples, but are there incidents you're aware of where that sort of activity has been manifesting online, but social media platforms have not taken the opportunity to report that to the police?
Yes.
And so I take it your view is that it would be helpful to receive that sort of information from them on a more regular basis.
In real time.
In real time. Can I then ask you about the topic of those who might preach hate speech or the like, which you address from paragraph 43 of your statement. You've noted at paragraph 45 that your unit treats hate preachers as presenting a significant risk of influencing individuals and in turn contributing to the commission of terrorist or violent offences. How have you come to form that view?
With a number of the intelligence reports that we see come through our area, our unit, we understand that certainly, and from community, hate preachers do actually have quite an influence over individuals within that community, and whether that's from being online or whether that's from delivering it from a centre or whether that's delivering it from the lounge room. They certainly do have an impact on community, and I won't go into specific examples, Commissioner, but certainly from our perspective, we watch that very closely to the point where if there is something that's pushed up online that we get access to, we look at every word.
And I take it that might involve translating sermons from time to time as well?
Correct.
And you've noted in your statement there have been a number of occasions in the last few years where police have undertaken that sort of activity, but there have been there's been insufficient evidence in those cases to proceed with charges.
Correct.
But that was at a time when the offence under Section 93ZAA of the Crimes Act was not in place.
That's correct.
And of course that's the more recent legislation that contains the offence of intentionally and publicly inciting hatred towards another person or group on the grounds of race.
That's correct.
You've noted anecdotally that hate preachers have tempered their language since those laws were introduced. What's the basis for that view that you express?
I think we base that on the fact that there were certain words said by individuals after the 7th of October 2023. When we look at the various anniversaries that occurred, in 24 and obviously in 25, we saw a much tempered language. And I said that to Mr. Sara during his recent review also, that we certainly saw a tempered language from those individuals.
We heard from an expert in Islamic extremism yesterday a view that it might be in some respects desirable that people purporting to be preachers and propagating hate within the Muslim community are not forced underground, as it were, by the closure of a facility where they're preaching from, because, as I understood Dr. Shanahan's evidence, it's better that these things are in the open so that they can be monitored and appropriate action taken. I'm wondering from a police point of view what your attitude to that view is?
Commissioner, I'd probably disagree with that.
Mm.
Because I think what it does is it opens the door for a lot more other individuals to attend such a centre.
Mm.
If these particular speeches are made online or in somebody's private property, the access online is obviously open. But if it's in somebody's lounge room, then it's probably a bit more restricted. If you've got a centre that is allowing that, it opens the door for a lot more individuals to attend. So I would respectfully disagree on that.
And just, I'm sorry, Ms. Hager, but the mechanism that might be available to deal with with that problem is prosecution under the now recently enacted provisions of 93 ZAA of the Crimes Act, and possibly a consideration of government funding in relation to an institution where behaviour of that sort's going on.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
At paragraph 48, you've noted that where the unit becomes aware of reports which raise concerns about individual people influencing others in the community in a way that may lead to the development of extremist beliefs or otherwise increase the risk of terrorism, those reports are referred to the Terrorism Security Intelligence Unit. Could you just describe for us what the role of that unit is?
The Terrorism Security Intelligence Unit will look at all threats, piece of information, Commissioner, that come in from various sources, including the National Security Hotline, partner agencies, and they will do an assessment of that particular piece of information, and at that point in time there's various processes that we have internally that will workflow depending on how immediate that threat may be as to what action that we take at that particular time.
And you've then noted at paragraph 57 that unit assesses individuals who span a broad spectrum of ideological beliefs, and that the most prevalent ideologies that arise in its consideration of individuals of concern are ideologically or religiously motivated violent extremism, as well as national and racist violent extremism. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you do go on to provide some other detail about the TSRU's work, which is understandably confidential, which the Commission has received, but I won't ask you about on this occasion. And in that context, Commissioner, I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you very much, Superintendent, for your evidence. You are now excused.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Commissioner, I now call Assistant Commissioner McCusker.
Yes.
Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please say I do.
I do.
Yes, thank you, Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Could you please state your name for us again?
Yeah, thank you. My full name is Leanne Michelle McCusker.
And you have prepared a number of statements for the Commission, but the statement most relevant to today is the one you prepared on 16 June 2026. Do you have a copy of that there with you?
Yes, I do.
And is that still true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
Commissioner, I tender that statement, which is stat.899.001.0213_H_R.
Yes, the statement is admitted.
And I note we have previously tendered your second statement, which was stat.899.0051.002, which is exhibit number 2-015, which is also relevant to this hearing, as well as your fourth statement, stat.899.0051.004, which is exhibit 2-017, which is a confidential statement. Could I then ask you some questions about your statement of 16 June?
Certainly.
In that statement, the Commission had asked you to address programs administered or co-administered by New South Wales Police in relation to the identification, early intervention, disengagement or deradicalisation of individuals, and you've noted at paragraph 11 of your statement that while New South Wales Police does not administer such programs, it does contribute to some programs of that kind. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
As well as a range of programs designed to foster social cohesion as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And can I ask you about the engagement and support program, which your colleague referred to briefly earlier? And before I get into the details of that, could I ask you to identify what you understand to be the difference between disengagement on the one hand and deradicalisation on the other?
Yes, certainly. That disengagement is really more about that, I suppose best described as prevention. So that early intervention and prevention, where de-radicalisation can be more about beliefs and an ideology, is probably just a simple way for explanation.
I see. And some have described de-radicalisation as a process of trying to change the beliefs or ideologies of individuals.
Yes.
And is it fair to say that the engagement and support program is more conceived of by the Department of Communities and Justice, who administers it, as a disengagement program?
Yes, I would say it more as disengagement, yes.
I see. And you deal with some detail around this program from paragraph 34 of your statement. It was first implemented in 2015?
Yes, it was, yes, as a pilot program, yes.
Yes, and at that point it was a program run by New South Wales Police?
Yes, it was in the beginning.
And can you say what prompted the creation of that program around 2015?
It was really at that particular time, really seeing the increase of that potential risk, really around radicalisation and the need for the early intervention for the prevention of that occurring, was really the first starting point of starting that program.
And then it was later, the delivery of that program was then later transferred to Department of Communities and Justice around about 2019?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And why did that transition occur, on your understanding?
Yeah, that transition occurred, that government at the time requested or put in place for a review and an evaluation, and following that review, and it was an independent review, and following that review and evaluation, that it was determined that the program was best completed outside of law enforcement, to have that separation from law enforcement, and best placed for it to be a multi-agency approach as well. So to ensure that all government agencies that could provide that support would have a seat at the table and be part of the solutions and the programming and what was best place for individuals to support them in that engagement program.
And understanding that it is a program administered by DCJ, and we'll have a witness from DCJ who'll come along to talk about it later in the hearing.
Certainly.
But just from your perspective, in general terms, could you describe what the engagement and support program does?
Yes. As I'd previously mentioned, a number of government agencies, and that's inclusive of New South Wales Police, that, and certainly been mentioned by my colleague previously, that a number of referrals may come into to the program, and that may be through police, it may be through family members, it may be through members of community that have a particular concern of an individual, of what those behaviours and actions may be. And with the ESP program, working through what is best suited for that individual, depending on what they may be experiencing, what their behaviours may be, and to put an appropriate plan, an appropriate action plan in place, a program in place that supports that individual, really in terms of prevention of getting to the point of a very, very strong extreme ideology.
And what are some examples of the sorts of supports that might be put in place for an individual who's at risk of radicalisation as part of that program?
Yeah, some of those examples, and I'll probably just talk broadly. Noting in particular, it might be young people. That it might be ensuring that they what's happening in the online space. So working through programs around that, health support if there's any mental health support, education. So what is taking place potentially in the school environment that they might need to enhance their social skills, or there may be activities going on in school that is causing them not to have a social circle. So building on that, building that strength of the individual, other various programs. So that may be working closely with either our youth command or youth engagement as well.
I see. I'll ask your colleague at DCJ for more detail around how all of that works. But in terms of the New South Wales Police's role in that program, it provides 2 officers from the Engagement and Hate Crimes Unit to assist?
Additional officers, yes. So additional officers that are part of that engagement and hate crime team. But through the MOU, there's been additional funding to support officers 2 officers to be part of the ESP program. Yes.
I see. And one of the officers takes what's called a police liaison officer or coordinator role.
Coordinator role, and that's of the sergeant rank. Yes.
And their role is to contribute to the program's assessment of eligibility upon receipt of a referral, and also subsequent case planning for that individual?
Yes, so working closely with their DCJ colleagues on that case planning, yes.
I see. And as part of their role, also potentially gathering information from within New South Wales Police that's relevant to that individual and their plan?
Yes, relevant information, but just need to be very, very clear that it's not a law enforcement process as well. That albeit police officer and sergeant rank, they are not looking that it's certainly not around law enforcement or any criminality.
It's not looking to investigate these individuals. It's looking to put in place supports for them.
Absolutely, yes.
And part of that officer's role is also to engage with the individual and their family networks as well.
Yep, certainly. Very there for the first face-to-face engagement, supporting the DCJ case manager, so having that face-to-face engagement with the individual and with family or whatever that support network may look like.
I see. And yes, there's also an engagement officer that New South Wales Police provides as part of this program as well.
Yes. So that's part of the expansion of the role of the engagement.
Yeah, that's been put in place since June this year.
Yes, correct.
I see. And a referral to the program might be made by New South Wales Police itself.
Yes.
But can also come from other organisations.
Yes, that's exactly right, and may very well come from family members as well through that Step Together hotline that was previously mentioned also.
I see. And might some of those organisations include, for example, the Department of Education, if concerning behaviour has been identified at school, for example?
Yes, absolutely.
I see. And if referrals come from sources outside New South Wales Police, does police necessarily have a role in assessing their suitability for referral in that scenario, or is that only when referrals come from police itself?
My understanding is that it is part of that joint referral and assessment process.
For all species of referral?
That is my understanding, yes.
And you've mentioned how a referral might originate from within police itself. One way is through the Assessment Review Committee.
Yes.
Could you just remind us what the role of that committee is?
Yes, so that is the Assessment Review Committee. That may be where, again, information may come through from a number of different sources. As mentioned by my colleague previously, it may come from the National Security Hotline, it may come from information from local commands, it may come from our partner agencies. The Assessment Review Committee will then analyse, triage, assess, analyse that information, and based on the collective information that comes to hand, one of the treatment strategies, so to speak, may be referral to the ESP program, and that is really, again, if it's not of a criminal nature, it's not a matter that needs to be referred to any of our investigators, that it's really about getting in front of and that prevention process. So that's where that referral may take place as well.
I see. And you've noted at paragraph 44 that an assessment can also be requested through the known entity management program as well.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that may be the reason for that is looking to see what are the current behaviours of that individual, and is it now a case that the ESP program may be the best the best thing for that individual.
And you've referred at paragraph 43 to some of the factors that might be taken into account when assessing suitability for referral. They include various protective factors as well as vulnerabilities of that individual.
Yes, absolutely.
And they might include looking at the individual's education situation, their employment, their family life, their social life, and their religious beliefs.
Yes, correct.
And that assessment process also involves conducting interviews with the individual and their family and maybe their peers as well.
Yes, to really get that full picture of the individual, not only from themselves but from those that are best placed around them for informed decision making.
And you've mentioned that the New South Wales Police also sits on the multi-agency panel. What's the role of that panel?
Yes, the role of that panel is that ongoing assessment, and then just to see if there's opportunity, and it may be the case of to assess whether the person can disengage from the program as well. So have they met all their goals, and that will be the collective opinion of the various different agencies that are sitting at the table, just to assess where that person, again, where that individual is at.
And you've noted in paragraph 41 that those agencies include Corrective Services, Youth Justice, Ministry of Health.
Yes.
And that agency panel has a role in, as you've said, reviewing the progress of participants, but it also has a role in endorsing new participant applications and their case plans as well?
Yes, just ensuring that, again, the collective information of the individual is discussed, and therefore how best placed all the different agencies are to play a role in that plan, and that all the agencies then can commit to that plan as well.
And what's your view on the effectiveness of the ESP as it currently operates?
That my opinion is that it is an effective program, and I've certainly had discussions with my officers that are attached to that program, so they are dealing with the individuals, they're dealing with the other agencies, that everybody does really work collaborative together, that everybody has the same strong intent of the outcome, and therefore it is an effective program that we do continue to enhance, and that is indicative of the recent MOU that has been signed and agreed to by both agencies in only of June of this year, and we continue to enhance that with resources and continue to enhance that with intelligence capability as well. I have had the benefit of, when I first came into this role in about August of last year, I received a full briefing from DCJ and my team on the ESP program, and even sitting at the table with everyone, I can see that sense of collaboration and also that sense of desire of really working for the individual.
You've noted at paragraph 48 that there is scope for further capability uplift and enhancement within New South Wales Police to support the early identification of individuals for referral to that program.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yes, and I think as we've heard that the program does continue to grow with referrals and those that are on the program, in particular as we see referrals coming through from concerned relatives through Step Together. I think that there is opportunity to always review the resourcing. There's an opportunity to have dedicated intelligence analysis, so we can with all the collective holdings of the individual coming together, some analysis can really determine or provide assistance as to what's required. And as has been previously mentioned, in particular in terms of the impact on online platforms, how the intelligence analysis there could be strengthened to see either what that impact is or how we can have a better understanding of that.
You mentioned further resources. Is that something that's currently being pursued by police, an increase in resources for this program?
So that has just taken place in June of this year, and
as part of the MOU you mentioned.
As part of the MOU. So certainly that was pursued by New South Wales Police and certainly agreed to by DCJ as well. So
Do you see a need for additional resources beyond that recent injection?
I think that intelligence capability would be incredibly beneficial.
And what do you mean exactly by that increased intelligence capability?
Just being able to talking with the staff as we've heard, that online platform to be able to have some stronger review of what's taking place there.
In the online environment?
Yes.
I see. Can I ask you about another topic that you've raised in your statement at paragraph 61, which is what you describe as bystander awareness training, which is something you say that police is currently exploring. What's the nature of that training?
Yes. So it is something that we have been currently looking at in terms of international practices that take place, of being able to improve the our threat management process, where that it may be, as we've mentioned, relatives, people that work with individuals, people that are socially connected to individuals, whatever that may look like, that they may be the best, that bystander awareness may be the best person to be able to provide changes of behaviour, some concerns of what an individual may be saying, what they may be doing, or that change of behaviour may actually be because they're not socialising anymore, but that's that change of behaviour, to have an opportunity to have stronger community education around that, and also in terms of the police understanding of those change of behaviours as well, but just the opportunity to be able to reach into those that have the connection with individuals and how they can communicate that as well.
So when you refer at paragraph 61 to structured bystander awareness training programs, are you envisaging training being delivered to police in terms of assisting them to understand the role and relevance of bystanders?
Yes, it would be twofold, exactly as you've just described, and also providing that community training and awareness as well, which is taking place within the engagement and hate crime team already, which is why those referrals do come in to step together. But if everybody, relatives or those closely connected to individuals, really understood that change of behaviour and how there's an opportunity, as was previously explained as well by my colleague, that you could get in front of that rather than you're reporting a crime to the National Security Hotline or to police, or that you're actually reporting your concerns and changes of behaviour, and we could get in front of that. And I think relatives, family and friends would be far more comfortable of that report as opposed to that they think they're reporting more of a criminal offence as well.
Then could I finally ask you about, there are a number of initiatives you outline in your statement, but the last one I wanted to ask about was the Compact program, the Community Partnership Action Program, which we heard a bit about from Professor Drugan yesterday. Could you just describe what you understand to be the nature of that program? You addressed it at paragraph 13.
Yes. So again, a joint representation, community partnership that really does aim is aimed at social cohesion, working with all agencies together, with community in particular, community being the forefront of of all the programs, and providing that specialist advice and really safeguarding and enhancing social cohesion.
And when you say specialist advice, could you provide some more detail around what sort of advice you provide in this forum?
It's that, and it has been mentioned before, of the understanding of hate crimes, how to report hate crimes, if we're seeing upward trends of particular hate crimes and temperature rising within a community, and so providing that information, and again of what is a hate crime, how to report a hate crime, and that understanding. But again, building that trust and confidence, in community, so honest conversations can also take place.
And do you consider that program to be an effective one?
Yes, very effective as well. Very effective.
Commissioner, I have no further questions for Assistant Commissioner McCusker.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Possibly for the last time, I'll excuse you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Commissioner, we'll now be moving into a closed session, and so I think there'll be a brief adjournment for that purpose while we clear the hearing room.
Yes, very well. I'll adjourn briefly.